is Michelle Buckley, and I'm doing this short video to introduce you to a paper that's just been published online in Antipode called Locating Neoliberalism in Dubai, Migrant Workers and Class Struggle in the Autocratic City. And this paper focuses on the regulation, the state's regulation of migrant construction workers in the city over about the last 10 years. What inspired the paper was a number of very interesting shifts in the political landscape for construction migrants in Dubai. The first is that there's been, over the last few years, a proliferation of informal labor welfare charities in the city. These have usually been informally organized migrant groups focused on donating basic necessities like clothing and food and so on to migrant construction workers who are often paid very little and in recent years have had a very hard time surviving in the city. The second shift is that since 2004 there have been dozens of labor strikes organized and led by migrant construction workers in response to a host of abuses within the industry, including unpaid wages, low wages, or unsafe and poor working conditions. And these aren't insignificant labor strikes. These have actually comprised tens of thousands of workers in some cases who have been very highly, if informally, organized. So I was curious to examine how these strikes and these groups have continued to persist in a city like Dubai, in a city that is not only non-democratic, but a city which is autocratic and effectively does not permit labor strikes. Labor strikes are illegal, and autonomous civil society groups, especially those led by migrants, are generally not tolerated by the state. What I've tried to do here is to juxtapose these kinds of recent events and recent insurgencies by migrant construction groups to complicate narratives about Dubai's neoliberal urbanism that portray lower wage migrant workers as entirely passive and subordinated subjects, but also neoliberalism as a monolithic and often spatially totalizing set of relations in the city. And I've tried to recast it instead as a process that's been focused very much on specific groups in the city, and as a process that's been in some cases highly contested and violently contested and mediated through spaces and institutions that are very particular to the city itself, to the city and its histories. So I make two main arguments in this paper. Firstly, that I argue that notions of neoliberalization that are too heavily inflected with the histories and experiences of European and North American cities can really hinder an analysis of the political significance of these strikes and the emergence of these labor welfare groups. What I've hoped to do is to try and parse out recent shifts in the governance of these construction migrants. For example, the emergence of private labor welfare charities, to question whether they're in fact a product of processes of neoliberalization, or whether they're actually an extension of existing autocratic structures of governance. And I think that doing this has real implications for the kinds of political possibilities that we might see in these kinds of events. In particular, I've been trying to get at really an articulation of how the grounded relations between neoliberalism and autocracy are unfolding in Dubai. As Jamie Peck has said, to explore how neoliberalism exists with its others. And what I suggest is there have been undoubtedly many complementarities between the adoption of neoliberal market policies and existing autocratic institutions and practices of governance in Dubai. There have also been a number of conflicts that have so far not been explored in depth in recent research on the city, but that I think are actually quite important to understanding why these strikes and labor welfare groups have emerged, and why, more importantly, why they've been allowed to exist in the city. What I focus on in particular is the ways that the state has sought to resolve these conflicts between its neoliberal and autocratic strategies through its control of urban space. and specifically how certain spaces and sites of social reproduction for migrant construction workers have become central sites in, on one hand, resolving the need for flexibilized migrant building labor for its neoliberalized urbanization agenda on one hand, against the threats that it perceives from the growing politicization of large numbers of single blue-collar men in the city. So what I highlight is that workers' bodies and the construction labor camp, these two sites have really become two very unstable and uneasy sites through which the state has sought to mitigate and control growing political activity by construction migrants and other migrant groups, while keeping them in the city. So, for example, labor welfare activities have been tolerated if they're focused on the kind of depoliticized and corporeal day-to-day necessities like food and clothing, but not if they become overtly sort of advocacy-based. While in the same way, worker strikes were allowed to happen peacefully if they take place in the sort of private space of the construction labor camp. But workers don't march necessarily through city streets to the Ministry of Labor. And this sort of spatial containment within these sites of social reproduction, I argue, has been key to their political containment, and to the state's efforts to depoliticize the activities and constrain the scope of their agenda away from the responsibilities of the state. And within these contradictions, workers and welfare providers have been able to carve out a kind of ephemeral and fragmented politics, but one that actually led to, in some cases, some very significant gains for workers, either in creating new institutions for making complaints against employers or gaining unpaid back wages, and so on. So to my mind, I've seen the informality of these organizing activities in some cases has been key to their ability to sort of challenge the state and employers. So that's kind of what I've tried to do. I'm not sure how successful I've been, but in particular I think this paper leaves a number of questions unanswered, and I think of them as kind of failures or perhaps elements that weren't but could have been elucidated more clearly. One of the key ones, I think, is I could have explored the binaries between public and private space in Dubai in more depth. The basic assumptions we often make in urban theory regarding the divisions between public and private space in cities, as based on cities like Paris or Chicago, they don't map very well onto a place like Dubai, where the notion of public space simply doesn't exist in the same way. And I haven't really thought that through very well, but it's something that I could have problematized more fully. However, I do hope that this paper offers something to a number of debates in urban studies right now, in part through efforts to try and internationalize urban theory and conceptualizations of neoliberal urbanism. I also hope that this paper makes a contribution to a number of other related conversations in and around migrant labor politics. There's some really exciting interdisciplinary research that's coming out that has explored, for example, how an urban lens is really important to understanding how migrant labor politics unfolds. Jeffrey Becker, for example, in comparative politics, has explored how the urban ties that migrant workers in China develop in the city are absolutely key to the ways in which their own politics of organizing play out. So I'm hoping that this paper is an addition to that conversation. So I'll leave it at there, but I appreciate any comments, criticisms, or just getting in touch. My email's on the paper. And thanks very much to the Antipode editorial team for inviting me to do this abstract. And thanks for watching.